Hi there, and welcome to this, let's call it an animation orientation video. This is just going to be a quick video where I'm going to go into how to animate at a very, very simple level, just to get you acclimated to some of the hotkeys and the process of animating in Maya. So right now, I'll just dive right in. We have our ball here. You might be thinking, well, that looks like a ball, but it has these golden little lines that are going on there. What's that all about? Well, in animation, we don't actually just animate. You're probably aware of this, but we don't actually just animate primitives all over the place. If you've ever seen an animated game or movie, uh, we tend to animate some pretty complex things. How do we keep all of this organized? Because at the end of the day, we're not just grabbing geometry and saying, hey, move this from here to there. It's actually driven by joint systems, and those joint systems are actually driven by NURBS curves. So that's what you're seeing right here and right there. Now, in this case, the main control is what we'll be using here to move this object around the scene. Of course, we're just going to do a vertical ball bounce. So basically, what this will entail is just basically moving the ball up and then back down, and we'll just create a very simple cycle, but I want to take you through the process of doing that, adding some squash and stretch, messing around with the spacing, which is basically, from a 2D perspective, the spacing is the distance that this object will move from one frame to the next.
An immensity of space and time. And our small planet, at this moment, here we face a critical branch point in history.
So pretty darn important. So if that didn't scare you, let's move on. First thing I'm going to do here is move the ball up to a position that I'm happy with. Now, right down here, you'll notice we have a timeline. Hopefully you're kind of familiar with what a timeline is. If you've ever watched a YouTube video or something, it's usually where time exists down here. So basically we're going to start at the very beginning, which is a great place to start. I'm going to start with the ball up in the air. So what we'll do here is just kind of, I'm arbitrarily picking like a position. You can go super crazy high, or you can keep it, reasonable, but I'm going to go right about there. 14.802. This, by the way, is known as the channel editor, channel box, or layer editor. You can kind of see it right there if you're looking for a cheat sheet. Basically what we'll be doing here is you're going to see your values that you manipulate on the ball, as you can see right there. It's going to take us into the direction that we're looking for. So wherever you end up moving this, it is going to record those values over here. Now the thing is, unless you actually register those values, it's not going to always go back to this value on this frame. So the goal there is to key, basically, let's call it register, the value and the location in time. So basically what I'll be doing is I'm going to go back and zero this out, and we will go to frame 0, move the ball wherever we want it to be, let's say somewhere about there, and I'm going to hit the S key on my keyboard here. Now I want you to keep your eye way down here, and if you can have your other eye, wall eye, and go way over here,
Dim your eyes. Too late.
you'll see, as I undo and redo that, that some of this lights up. Now what's going on there? It's basically just telling you that it has registered the key on frame 0 and registered these values that are over here. So what's next? Well, if we're going to do a little bit of a loop here, might as well take the ball and bring it down to the ground, right? So sounds pretty good. Hit the S key just to make sure that registers. And now, yes, you already have, I would hesitate to call this animation. I would call it motion. But if you remember, animation is the illusion of life. This, if you define it that way, I wouldn't really call it animation. This isn't going to get you a job anywhere. So this is what Maya is going to give you by default. It's not too bad. I mean, hey, it's heading in the right direction, right? The problem is if you're looking at this and you're seeing the ball as it falls and you're going, yeah, it kind of looks like it's, is that slowing as it arrives toward the ground? Anybody who's ever thought about an object that falls knows that it accelerates as it falls, right? Well, if that's the case, shouldn't the spacing get further and further apart? Does it look like it's getting further and further apart as it arrives toward the ground? I mean, if we all did this, I'd be jumping off bridges for fun. Like, you can just, look at that. It's slowing down as it arrives toward the ground. So, obviously not realistic. So how do we make that actually work to our advantage. Do we have to actually go through here and put a bunch of keys all the way? No, as it turns out. I'll show you a pretty quick, nifty tool, but first I want to, I'm going to go to the animation tab here, and I'm going to pull up the ghost selected. Now, this is really not something that I use too often personally, though I do think it's kind of helpful as a teaching tool. So right now you can kind of see that the ball, you can kind of see 3 drawings before and 3 drawings after here. And as you can see how it's starting to compress? It's getting closer and closer together as it nears the ground. This is not optimal. So this is where we get into some fun stuff, because we're not actually going to place a bunch of keys everywhere. We can actually use what's known as the graph editor. Now, I'm going to get into this in a very cursory way. This is just to get you acclimated to the software. But if you understand this particular editor here, you go to Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor, go ahead and pull that up. If you have dual monitors, I highly suggest it, because you can kind of move it into another window. But what this does is it gives you this sort of colorful spaghetti looking thing. You don't really know what this is exactly, but I assure you, if you take the time to understand this window, you will be able to do probably like 10x quality in your animation at about like 3x less work, if that makes sense, if you can follow the math on that. But if you see the ball here as it's slowing down, we want to fix that, right? So by fixing it, we basically want the drawings, each individual frame, to be further and further and further apart in space. So to do that, you can see here I just isolated the translate Y. Now, why would I do that? You know, I've got all of these different channels. We haven't really been messing with rotation, so obviously, you know, it kind of makes sense. I don't have to really worry about that. As you can see here, there's kind of a flat line. If you're familiar with the medical field, whenever you hear somebody say this person is flatlining, basically means there's no motion. They're dead. In this case, rotation, there's basically a flat line going on in the graph editor, meaning there's no motion there. So we don't actually have to worry about any of those. Now, translate Z here, there's nothing going on. Translate X, nothing going on. Translate Y, oh, wait a minute, what's that all about? Well, if you remember, over there, we actually have something going on here. If I scrub through, you can see the values changing. So let's get back to fixing our spacing. So to do this, grab your translate Y, and you can actually click these little black dots here, and these actually represent your keys. Now, when you have these keys, they actually, when you select them, they'll have a tangent on the left and right side. And what you can do with these, if you're familiar with Bezier curves, you can basically take these and start cranking them and changing the way your motion works, which is kind of interesting. But more interesting than that is it actually shifts the way your in-betweens will be interpreted by the software. So if we're looking at this, you see a bunch of these individual frames, you can kind of see how everything is pretty evenly spaced. Now, if I were to take this, and instead of making it flat, now if you remember earlier I said that things that flatline mean basically they move to 0 movement. So if this is going to basically have horizontal, which is a flat line, that means that it's going to arrive at the ground and, you guessed it, it just stops. So what we want is this object to not slow down to a stop. We want it to basically impact really sharply, so sharpen the tangent there. Makes sense? So let's see what that does. Once you do this, you'll actually begin to see that the spacing changes, right? So we actually want our impact to be much, much greater near that smash that we're looking for. So now you can see that the spacing is much more realistic, actually. Every passing frame, the ball gets further and further apart. So once you impact the ground, of course, we said we're not just going to have this land, we actually want it to bounce up in the air. So let's go ahead and place another key at 24 up in the air. Well, I'm a bit lazy, if you haven't already noticed that I don't want to even put a bunch of keys through here. I want to actually just use the graph to optimize my scene and not have to do as much work. If you're like me, maybe you don't want to actually have to pose this pose right here. Maybe you want the location at 0 and just want to, I don't know, copy it over to 24. To do that, if you have your main control selected, you can go ahead and just take whatever you want. Let's say, I mean, this is, you can take this frame, and of course this is what I would suggest. But you can actually do this from anywhere. You could say, like, I really like this position on 4 for some reason. And you could say, I'm going to middle mouse and place it wherever I want. So you'll notice that if you left mouse click, you can actually scrub through your timeline. Kind of makes sense. But if you middle mouse from wherever you were last, it will actually copy that key. So look at the value or the location of the ball right now. And I'm going to middle mouse over to 20 and just hit the S key. So you'll see we're going to hit 12 and then it's going to come back up and it's actually going to hit that exact location. I'm going to go back to 5. You see that? The ball is in the exact same place. I've just copied that key super fast. Just go to 0, middle mouse onto 24, hit S, and you have successfully bounced the ball down and then back up. Now here's the problem. Now, if we look over here, remember how I tweaked that tangent? This side is going below the ground. So you can kind of see how it goes below and then back up. We need to fix that. So how do we do it? There's this guy right here. See how this tangent looks like it's kind of broken? That's what we're going to do, is break it. And you'll notice that this side, the left side here, changes color. Basically just letting you know, yeah, the tangents are different. Now, if your graph editor looks a little bit different than this one, you can go over to this little AOL guy right here, and under Animation, scroll down, and you'll see Graph Editor. Instead of Modern, which is the new 2017 version, you can actually switch it to Classic. I prefer the Classic aesthetic. It's just me. There's really no difference, technically. The Classic I just find is a little bit easier on the eyes. But you can go ahead and do that, and it will actually change the way your graph editor will look. Personally, I don't like the aesthetic of the new one because it actually doesn't switch this to blue, and I'm just used to that. I like it. But basically what we'll do is we're going to sharpen this tangent as well, and you'll start to see why we do that. Well, if we brought this back to flat, see how the spacing is very close together as it starts moving back up? Anything that bounces off of the ground, as it turns out, does not accelerate up from the ground. It's not a rocket ship. Rocket ships, remember, they kind of and then take off, right? A ball that's bouncing actually is decelerating, not accelerating, as it moves up. So we actually want this to be a sharp tangent as well, which means every passing frame, it is slowing down until it reaches this location. And if we're going to have this loop, guess what? These are the same. And of course the ball will then fall, bounce, go up this way, and then fall again, bounce, and then that's our loop. So we've got our translate Y looking pretty good, right? So that's looking all right. Now I'm going to turn off the ghosting there, and I want to show you a quick way to, I hesitate to use the word render. It's really kind of screen grabbing and aggregating a bunch of images into a video called a play blast. But if you go down here, right click, you'll see play blast right there. Hit the option box and use these settings that you see here. You can even save to file if you like, but at this point I wouldn't even do that. But when you hit save to file, you can actually hit browse and name the file and all that jazz. But right now what I'm going to do is just a quick play blast, and before I do that, I'm even going to go to show, turn off the NURBS curve so we can just see the silhouette of the ball, and hit play blast. Now, right now, we have something of a ball bounce, right? Not bad. I'm going to keep this because we're going to come back to it in a moment. Check this out. I'm going to bring us back to what it was initially so we can do a little visual comparison. So I'll take this and I'm just going to hit back to auto, which is actually what the default curve interpolation will be, and then turn this off. Go ahead and play blast again. By the way, by just hitting play blast here, it's going to just use whatever your last settings were. So hopefully you're looking at this one on the right and going, oh yeah, that doesn't look right at all. Now you might notice, like, or you might be thinking, why didn't you just hit play? Like, what's the point of, why are you play blasting this? Well, like, isn't hitting play good enough? Yes and no. It depends on the speed of your computer. It depends on, what are you doing on your computer at the same time. Like, I don't know if you're like me, but I have Chrome open with about 47,000 tabs. And I'm recording this right now, which also takes up some system resources. When you hit play, It will play it at 24 FPS, but as you can see here, it's kind of dropping frames, right? It's not unlike if you've ever played a video game and it has some sort of frame lag, where it has a bit of a chug, a visual chug going on there. So if you want to avoid that and really see what your animation looks like, there's nothing better than just hitting play blast. So that is what I would suggest you do. That's what animators do. And if you want to be an animator, probably a good idea. So now we have the ball bounce. That's looking pretty good. I'm going to undo this to bring us back to where we were. See the difference? So now we're not quite done. We have this other control here that I have been neglecting up to now. This is our squash and stretch. I like making it freak out. Now, what separates this from like just, taking a regular sphere, NURBS primitive or something and scaling it, in and out? This, as it turns out, actually does maintain volume, and it's actually joint driven. So this has a much nicer fall off and bit of a gumminess to it than you would otherwise be able to create with like scaling. And of course it's 1,000 times faster to do this rather than hit scale and then move it down and then out. This actually is kind of more automated for our convenience. So if we're going to create some squash and stretch on this bounce, now there's a couple of ways that you can do your bounce. Right now I only have a single frame on the contact here. It is possible to do 2 frames on your contact. If you want to do that, you can choose to do so by just copying, just like we did earlier, how we took 0 and middle mouse down to 24. You could actually take 12, middle mouse down to 13, and hit the S key. Now, if you do this, if you choose to do this, you have to go to your graph editor because it's not going to have the right tangents. So you have to maybe go in here and put these back to auto and tweak accordingly. So just go ahead and remember, as I'm sharpening this, I'm sharpening it as much as I can without doing one of these. Don't do this. If you do this, the ball's going to go up before it goes down, which makes no sense. So take this. We're going to sharpen that as well. But again, you want to break that tangent so you get an isolated movement there. So now we have 2 frames on the ground, and then it bounces back up. So why is that, such an important thing? Well, I'll show you in a moment here. So if you grab the whole ball, you can kind of see all of the keys on all of the control curves. Now this one doesn't have any keys on it. You can see that there's no red here, there's no red on the timeline. If you grab the whole thing, you can actually just hit S and go to the next one and hit S and go to the next one and hit S and go to the next one and hit S, and now go back to that control, and you have basically just null keys. These aren't doing anything, but they're kind of placeholders, which can be nice because now I can say, okay, cool, maybe I want this to be squash, and maybe I want this to super squash. Cool, that's awesome. But are you noticing something? You see how the ball is starting to squash before it arrives to the ground? Maybe you want this to be a stretch just before you squash. And then you super squash, and then maybe you stretch again, right? Now, you could make this first contact pose a stretch. That's entirely possible. You could go stretch, stretch, and then squash, and then push off that way. So there's a myriad of ways to do this. I can't say that there's no wrong way. There is a wrong way, but you have to kind of play around with what aesthetically looks the most pleasing to your eye. There's some wiggle room within this. So you'll notice now that I have those, stretch and then squash and stretch here. Now I've got this kind of egg shape going on, like halfway through here and halfway through there. If you wanted this to feel like really 2D, you could actually put a zeroed out key right before you hit your stretch. So you could do that, of course, on the other side as well. And just zero that out. And now you have it basically zeroed out until it hits this point, and then boom, stretch, stretch, squash, stretch, and then zero it out again. Now you take all that and you turn off the NURBS curves and you hit play blast. You will have a bouncing ball. Congratulations. This is the first 3D animation that you may have created, and you did a bang-up job. Thanks for watching, and yeah, if you have any questions on this, watch this again. How about that? Or, email your instructor. Probably a good idea. So, again, thanks for watching, and take care. Have fun.